And before this video begins, I'd just like to give a special thank you to my Asban Team level patron, Fallon Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. So, not too long ago, Season 2 of House of the Dragon wrapped up, the Game of Thrones prequel that, at least initially, restored some semblance of honour and dignity to the franchise after the disaster class of Game of Thrones Season 8, at least until everything started melting down again. House of the Dragon reignited my interest in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, but it also brought my attention back to an age-old debate within the fanbase. A visual controversy that began with Game of Thrones and continues to this day with House of the Dragon. The purple eyes, or lack thereof. Ever since Season 1 of Game of Thrones, one of the most baffling changes from the books is the removal of the iconic purple eyes unique to the Targaryen bloodline. However, I personally feel like it's not nearly as damaging as many fans make it out to seem, and it actually makes a lot of sense within the world of these two shows. So today, I thought I'd cross the not so narrow sea to the world of Ice and Fire to work out just what happened to those iconic purple eyes. In the book A Game of Thrones, we're introduced to a continent in peacetime, many years after Lord Robert Baratheon rose up against the tyrannical King Aerys Targaryen and claimed the Iron Throne for himself after the alleged kidnapping of his betrothed Lyanna Stark. Chapter 3 of the book introduces Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen, the last known survivors of the dynasty, living in exile and dreaming of the day they can return to Westeros and reclaim their family's throne. Daenerys is described as having violet in her eyes, and her brother, a gaunt young man with nervous hands and a feverish look in his pale lilac eyes. Indeed, these eyes are one of the unique physical traits exclusive to those hailing from the now dead lands of Valyria. These eyes, along with pale skin and silver, platinum or golden hair, give the Targaryens a surreal, almost ethereal beauty, and they're consistent traits for almost every Targaryen within the written media of A Song of Ice and Fire. And that almost is going to be very important later on. From Aegon the Conqueror to Daenerys the Unburnt, purple eyes are a staple of the Targaryens in the books, but not controversially when it comes to the 3 adaptations made by HBO. And that's where things get spicy. Despite its reputation now being in tatters because of those horrible last couple of seasons, Game of Thrones was a huge success when it first began airing in 2011. It was praised for its production design, casting, writing, and, at least towards the beginning, its accuracy as an adaptation. Of course, like any adaptation, there were differences when the book was translated to screen, like aging up most of the child characters, some extra scenes added for context, some slight naming changes, all very minor stuff. As far as adaptations go, Season 1 is very accurate, except there were no purple eyes to define the Targaryen exiles, just like their iconic silver hair does. Given that these features were meant to make the Targaryen family ethereal godlike beings to the Westerosi, it's a big omission and fans have always been pretty bitter about it, even to this day. However, it was never really a purposeful departure from the source material. Instead, a change forced to happen because actors Emilia Clarke and Harry Lloyd found the purple contact lenses uncomfortable and detrimental to their ability to act with their faces. So the purple eyes were dropped from the show and the silver hair became the single defining trait for the family, even in brief flashbacks of Aerys and Rhaegar. Compared to the later changes that torpedoed the show, it is a very minor aesthetic issue. But I definitely understand why it would feel disappointing for some fans because of how the look of the Targaryens is hyped up so much in the book. But hey, it was 2011, purple eyes weren't very viable at the time and that's okay. It's not like they still refuse to do it over a decade later, right? They refuse to do it a decade later. Yes, whilst House of the Dragon is, or at least attempted to be at the start, a lot more visually faithful to its source material than Game of Thrones, seeking to portray a slightly more book-accurate Iron Throne, for example, the many Targaryens within the show still lack those iconic purple eyes. Now, you could excuse it back in 2011, but it's a lot harder to excuse in 2022 when House of the Dragon began airing. A few years before, The Witch had given the co-lead Yennefer her famous purple eyes, so it should have been easy for House of the Dragon to do the same, and finally give us those book-accurate Targaryens. However, it's obvious that the production team wanted to keep a sense of consistency to Game of Thrones itself, so they decided that randomly bringing in purple eyes would be a bit of a weird change for many TV-only fans. I personally feel like they should have just bit the bullet and had the purple eyes anyway, but the commitment to the eyes has maintained that fan discontent. However, when I was reading the source material Fire and Blood and exploring the many rabbit holes of a wiki of Ice and Fire, I realised that the lack of purple eyes in both adaptations is actually very easy to explain and still quite lore-friendly. It's very easy to just headcanon. But how? When the books place such an emphasis on the eyes, how can the show still fit the lack of purple into the canon? Well, to answer that, I think we need to summarise the history of the Targaryens themselves. Hailing from the beautiful, rich city of Valyria, the Targaryen family wasn't a powerful house, but they still had dragons, like their fellow Valyrian kinsmen. At some point, Lord Aenar's daughter Daenerys had a premonition of Valyria being destroyed, so Aenar sold his estates and moved the entire family and all its belongings to a remote island outpost named Dragonstone, which sat off the coast of Westeros. 12 years later, Daenerys' dream came true with the Doom of Valyria, a mysterious cataclysm which destroyed the city and all of its dragon lords, leaving the Targaryens as the only remaining dragon riders. As the Valyrian freehold collapsed and its territories were claimed by the other powers of Essos, the Targaryens continued to live on Dragonstone for a century, continuing their family tradition of marrying siblings and growing their wealth significantly. However, eventually, Aegon Targaryen turned his sights west, and together with his two sister wives Visenya and Rhaenys, would conquer and unite 6 of the 7 Westeros kingdoms in the defining event Aegon's Conquest, establishing the Targaryen dynasty as the rulers of Westeros. And I know what you're thinking, that's cool and all, but what does that have to do with eye colour? Well, the key to it all is Aegon's bloodline. You see, it was customary for Targaryens to marry their siblings to keep their bloodline pure and maintain their status as dragon lords. It was all a bit eugenic-y. However, not every Targaryen marriage was such an incestuous union. Indeed, they often married Velaryons, another family from Valyria who had settled the island of Driftmark, but without the dragon blood the Targaryens prided themselves upon having. The Velaryons often have Valyrian features, but they also sometimes have blue or grey-green eyes, introducing the idea of some genetic diversity into the Targaryen family, and especially Aegon's direct lineage. Aegon and his sisters were half Velaryon on their mother's side, and even though their father Aerion was a Targaryen, his mother and grandmother are still unknown, meaning they could potentially be non-Targaryen families too. Aegon definitely had purple eyes, that much is true. His weak son Aenys, yes that's his name, had paler eyes however, and that's where I think the interesting nugget of my theory really kicks in. Aenys himself married a Velaryon, who was also half Massey, and the succession continued through their children Jaehaerys and Alysanne, who in turn produced Alyssa and Baelon Targaryen, whose children Viserys and Daemon are central figures of House of the Dragon and Fire and Blood. By the time Viserys becomes king, it's 103 years after Aegon began his conquest of Westeros, which is plenty of time for that pure Targaryen blood to start wavering a little bit. The Targaryens are famed for their purple eyes and silver hair, but there have been those to not receive these genetic traits. Most of these were later in the timeline, like Baelor Breakspear, who had dark hair and eyes thanks to his Martell mother, his son Valar with brown hair and blue eyes being part Dondarrion, and lastly Daeron the Drunken with sandy brown hair and Dane ancestry. However, Queen Alysanne herself, the grandmother of Viserys, had blue eyes and honey-coloured curls, with her daughter Viserys' mother Alyssa being described as the following. Her hair was a dirty blonde tangle with no hint of silver to evoke the dragon lords of old, and she had been born with mismatched eyes, one violet, the other a startling green. It's clear that this is the Velaryon or Massey genetics manifesting. So when we get to the beginning of House of the Dragon and we meet a non-purple-eyed Viserys Targaryen, I think it actually works, because there is enough genetic diversity from his mother and grandmother to diminish the purple eyes, which were already faint back in Aenys many decades earlier. Viserys marries the half-Targaryen, half-Arryn Aemma to produce Princess Rhaenyra, and then Alicent Hightower to produce Aegon II and the other Green Targaryens during the show. Again, this is all further diluting the blood, and purple is already canonically not the most dominant eye colour as proven with those earlier examples, and Rhaenyra's own bastard children with Harwin Strong, who have dark hair and dark eyes despite being half Targaryen. I feel like I'm connecting red strings with a tinfoil hat, but you're seeing how this is all coming together, right? The Targaryens we see in both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon are so far removed from Aegon's pure blood that their lack of purple eyes actually makes complete in-universe sense, because of all these non-Targaryen ancestors in the gene pool, especially when you get to the time of Daenerys, whose own nephew Jon Snow has his Stark mother's features instead of his Targaryen father's. So why then, with all this gene pool dilation and feature mixing, does Fire and Blood maintain that almost every Targaryen has those same purple eyes? Well, the answer is simple, and it's something set up by a somewhat throwaway line in House of the Dragon itself. It's propaganda. Just like the Targaryens having unique dragon blood, meaning only they can bend the beasts to their will, when that's actually not true. Fire and Blood is framed as a history book within the world of the franchise, written by Archmaester Gyldayn, who is supposedly alive during the reign of Robert Baratheon. So a lot of the material within the book is made up from conflicting primary accounts and casting doubt over its accuracy. We know the Targaryens take a lot of pride in their supposed genetic superiority, something proven by their unique physical features. Indeed, to have dark eyes or dark hair like Rhaenyra's sons raises questions regarding legitimacy, regardless of how accurate the claims are. The eyes and the hair of a Targaryen are status symbols, so naturally if you give them control over the news and the history books, they can very easily just claim to have the same striking purple eyes of the great Aegon who conquered Westeros on his great dragon Balerion. So clearly, because you're part of the same bloodline, you're just the same and you have the same rights and claims as he does. Hell, it even only takes one recent Targaryen like Aerys II, the Mad King, to insist all his ancestors are written to have these traits to ensure his own superiority and God-given rule over the kingdoms and their law. Obviously, many of the Targaryens would have legitimately maintained these traits, but the ones who didn't had the power and status to just claim they did, and nobody could really say otherwise because they'd be committing treason. As the saying goes, history is written by the victors, and that is proven time and time again within the pages of Fire and Blood, written in the later years of a nearly 300-year-old dynasty. And we also can't forget the conversation between Cersei and her son Joffrey, where she claims that when he's king, history will be whatever he wants it to be. Obviously, at the end of the day, George R.R. Martin has made it canon that the purple eyes are a trait of all these characters whose TV counterparts don't share them. So no matter what mental gymnastics I perform, I can't change the fact that Daenerys legitimately has purple eyes in the books, and so do her ancestors in Fire and Blood. The TV shows simply did deviate from the book canon with those changes, but that still doesn't stop me enjoying my own headcanon for the in-universe reason for such a different appearance. It's interesting to imagine that this distinguishing trait isn't nearly as prominent as many sources chronicle, with the gene pool weakening it and the later Targaryens manufacturing their own legacies to maintain their dynastic grip on the Seven Kingdoms. House of the Dragon has made other changes, obviously, the most significant being the skin colour of the Velaryons, and the hair colour of Rhaenys, which ironically was actually dark in the books because she was part Baratheon. So there are a lot more damaging creative liberties than some simple purple eyes. But with so many Westerosi families marrying into the Targaryen dynasty, I think the lack of purple eyes becomes much less of an issue when you just accept that they became a victim of genetic diversity by the time we meet the family on screen in both shows. But anyway, that's enough conspiratorial rambling for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. And I'd just like to give an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patron Fallon Cortez, my Platinum level patron Matthew Burns, and all my Gold level patrons Chris Douglas, Daniel Shillito, Thomas Zar, and the 3 Railway Engines. Thank you so much for your support.